So thank you for joining us for another episode of Moving Mountains. I'm Samaya Simone, and I'm with my co-host,
Aisha Battle.
and we have a special guest with us today, Paula Penn-Nabrit. And the reason she's so special is that she's written several books, one of them on homeschooling called Morning by Morning. And that book inspired me in my homeschooling years ago. And I remember I would literally wake up in the morning, and it was funny, the name of the book is Morning by Morning. So it was like part of my morning reading, you know? And I remember when the book ended, I was like, wow, like
Now what do you do, right?
yes, yes. But Paula, your book made it helped me because at the time I read your book, my daughter, who's now 20, was young then, and your kids were then grown.
Okay.
So it made me know that this journey was possible and that I could set the goals for my own homeschool.
Yes. I'm thrilled to hear you say that, because I think that is for me, that's such a critical point. It was a critical point then, and I think it is still a critical point as families across the country and across the world, quite frankly, are finding themselves, because of COVID-19, thrown into this situation of having to be much more involved in the day-to-day education of their children. And that then calls into question, what is the end game? Like, what's the long-term? And not that we never think about this strategically before, but I think in a traditional sense, and I was a traditional parent. My husband and I, we looked for a good school, and we enrolled our kids in the school. And like most parents, we just figured out, now they're in kindergarten, and next year they'll be in first grade, and the year after that they'll be in second grade, and this will just happen. And so when we began homeschooling, we really had to step back and think strategically, what is it that we want this educational experience to be? And to recognize that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, which is what I think a lot of parents are feeling a lot of stress right now, thinking, oh, my kid is 7, and if this year doesn't go perfectly, what does that mean for their life? Nothing. They're 7, right? They're 7. They're going to be fine.
Right.
They're going to be fine.
Right. Now, one of the original reasons that I called you, that I messaged you about being on the show, was there was an article put out by Harvard, Harvard
magazine.
Yes, about homeschooling, right?
Yes.
So I remember reading the article, and I felt like the top was coming off my head or something.
Okay. Yes.
And then I ended up reading your response, and I was just like, that's it. That was everything I could have said and wanted to say, said better, written better than I could have written it. I mean, it was perfect.
Thank you. I read the article, and I too was outraged. And I tried to determine, I try to move through the world with an intentionality about being a prime mover. I don't want to be a person who is always reacting to external forces.
Right.
And I think for us, as what I would say as an unambiguously Black person, as an unambiguously Black woman, I can't afford to expend energy reacting and responding to every instance of patriarchy and systems of white supremacy. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to live my life. I'd always be reacting to other people. And so I try to be really mindful about operating as the prime mover. So other people will have to respond to me. I don't react to you. So when I feel emotions that are negative or angry, I try to figure out what is it that's happening that made me choose anger. Right? I chose to be angry when I read that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I chose to be angry because I felt that there were, again, intersecting issues. I read that and I kept thinking, well, first I had to Google the person. Who wrote this? Like,
Right.
who are you? Like, seriously, who are you?
Who are you? Yeah.
And why are you talking about this? And do you actually know anything about it?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I Googled her and I looked at her background and I just thought, granted, she wasn't specifically addressing Black people homeschooling. So I had to really ask myself, why am I feeling as though this is a collective attack on us as Black people? Why did it feel personal? Because again, I haven't been actively homeschooling in decades. As I said, my youngest son is 37 years old. So it's not like I'm in the trenches right now and this felt like a full frontal attack. So as I thought about it, I realized that the reason that I had an intense reaction and I chose to be angry was because I felt that the article was not only dismissive, but fundamentally anti-intellectual.
Right.
And so what angered me is sort of the flip side of what frequently angers me about a lot of homeschoolers. This absolutism that people like to get into, so that on the one hand you hear homeschoolers saying, it's my child and so I'm the best person to educate them because I had them. Really? Because just because I get a car doesn't mean I know how to drive one.
Right.
So and we know that a lot of people don't know how to parent, period, full stop. One of the things that I'm really concerned about right now are the number of children who are trapped at home with parents who are engaged in domestic violence, also known as spanking and beating and tearing up that behind. And, we think that's cute.
Right.
Okay. We think that's cute. So the fact that a lot of people can't separate parenting from violence makes me know you absolutely are not the best educator for your child because you can't even control yourself. You can't keep your hands to yourself when you're angry. Right. I mean, isn't that what kids learn in kindergarten? Keep your hands to yourself. So there's that. But this to me was more egregious because this is someone, the author of this article, and having it published under the imprimatur of Harvard, right? So it has all kind of validation. This
right,
is
exactly.
Jojo, the dog-faced boy on the corner. Right. This is Harvard, an esteemed institution, providing its imprint of approval on something that was facile at best. I mean, where is your documentation for this? It's one thing if this were just written as this is an opinion piece, like op-ed stamped on the top, but it didn't say op-ed.
No.
And the only book she referenced was Educated, that memoir about the woman who was raised by survivalists in Idaho.
Right.
Where was your book? Like, where did she read your book?
See, so I just felt like it was facile and irresponsible. And I'm not adverse to the idea of the state regulating or considering the regulation of homeschooling. Because I do know that there are people who say they're homeschooling and they're not. There's no education happening. I have a problem with people who act like you don't understand that this is a capitalist democracy and what that means, right?
The only thing, though, I guess I do have an issue with the state regulating, especially when it comes to us. And I think my reason is, if you come into my homeschool to regulate how I educate my children,
right,
you can't do better.
No.
You know what I mean? If I put them in school, that school to prison pipeline is real.
Well,
exactly. How boys are treated, you know what I mean? So
thing is, the fact that regulation may or may not be relevant isn't hinged on the presumption that schools are doing it better. Schools need to be more regulated than they are.
Right.
The difficulty that I guess I have, and this is what sort of bothered me about the article in Harvard Mail, given the structure of Harvard and the fact that the person who wrote this article has a law degree, so certainly understands how regulatory processing happens and what the legislative history is and where public policy fits in. She was in a unique position to really present a well-reasoned argument, right? That can say, yes, here's how the state has a vested interest. If we have a sizable percentage of the population of children who reach adulthood and let's say they are not able to read, does that create a burden for the state? Yes, it does. Now, how do we address that? There are multiple ways in which we can address that. And so it's not that I don't have bona fide concerns about the state interceding in my family's day-to-day life. But I also find it interesting that only in the area of homeschooling do people take the sort of adamant, hard line, I don't want the government in my life, right? Because that's my whole issue with survivalist homeschoolers. I don't want the government in my life. And you're driving on government roads and your phone is connected through government-funded communication systems. If we're going to be here as part of the Republic, I need to understand how the Republic functions, and then I need to stake out my space in it, right? And I think one of the challenges, Aisha, you were mentioning about the homeschooling thing, now that you're doing it full time. I mean, I think part of what parents are coming to grips with is it's much easier to critique something than to create something, right?
Yes.
What is it that I want to create for my own family first? And then secondly, what is the structure in which I'm operating? Like I used to have what my parents would call a real job. I had a real job. After law school, my husband was already working for AT&T. And after law school, I took a job with them. And we worked for AT&T's wholly owned subsidiary, American Transtech, and my job was the review and approval of the legal requirements for the split and distribution of all AT&T stock into the 7 regional holding companies. So, there used to be like just one phone company, and then there was like Bell South and all those little ones. That was my job. I was good at the work, but I did not like having a job. I did not like having a boss who could tell me what to do. I didn't like it. I thought my boss was stupid.
Yeah.
We did not like each other. It was unpleasant. And I finally just realized this is the only life I'm going to have.
Right.
I don't want to spend it around these people all day, every day. And I was becoming an evil person. Right? I was really becoming a stank. When I think about some of the horrible things I said to people, I feel really ashamed. I feel really, as they say, how you gonna witness? Okay, it was terrible. But I decided I was not gonna stay there for 30 years and complain about it. This is the structure. I see the structure. I don't like the structure. I left the structure. I choose to separate myself from that. I'm not going to stay in the thing and just like, yeah.
Right.
So if I know what the standards are, I'm going to meet or exceed them. And if I'm meeting or exceeding them, I don't mind that, when we were homeschooling, you had to submit like at the end of the year portfolio of what did you do this year? I'm not talking about regulation in which somebody's coming to your house to see if it's clean.
Okay.
Right. I'm talking about submitting a bibliography or submitting a portfolio, which is what we would be doing if your kid was going to college, right? you're submitting documentation of what has happened. You don't just show them, say, I'd like to go to school here.
Right. So you're in a state where you do that.
In Ohio, I think they still require that in Ohio.
Okay.
I don't know.
In New
But
Jersey now, we don't have that requirement. I know New Jersey doesn't have it. Texas doesn't have it. But here they just proposed the law. I think there's two bills that have been proposed so far this year, this session, where they want to see. One of them, I think, even wants medical records. So one of my concerns right now, one of them, I think, and I should have double checked that, and I will double check it. But my concern is when you look at the trending right now, legally speaking, that there's a motivation behind these bills that aren't about what's good for the child. Because if they were really caring about children, they've got a plethora of them in the school system that they're failing every day. You know what I mean?
They don't.
They're not learning to read.
This is not about care of our children.
No, they're not learning to read. They're not learning basic math. Like when you look at I grew up thinking I was bad at math. And like literally I really thought that. Like the thought of doing math would almost bring me to tears because of an experience I had in school where a teacher kicked me in front of the whole class because I got an answer wrong. And that traumatized the mess out of me because the class laughed, and it was just like one of those horrific experiences. So, when it came time to educate my own daughter for math, I remember like literally crying in bed at night. She's about to get her degree in math now. So when there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
But the thing is, like, as I was investigating and praying about and begging God to help me with educating her and making sure that she was good in math, because I was like, you're going to be good in math. That's just a requirement of my homeschool. Like math, you don't have to be a mathematician, but you're going to be good in math.
Right.
There's all these ways you can teach math that just makes so much more sense than what they do in school. And they haven't gotten that down.
Right.
Like they haven't gotten just basic, like how to teach basic math down.
But we know that. I mean, we know when we talk about patriarchy, when we talk about systems of white supremacy, we know that these are ideologies that are embedded.
Right.
Right. So we know that when the state comes forth with any kind of issue of regulation or oversight, there's no rational reason for us to presume that this is in the best interest of our families or our children. It's in the best interest of the state.
Right.
It's then incumbent upon us not to sit around and say, girl, you see what they're trying to do? We already know that.
Right.
We already know that. Mm-hmm. There's nothing new under the sun.
No.
Yeah, the system is set up to do what it's supposed to do.
It does what it's supposed to do. Now the question is, why are we not more assertive in determining not how I'm going to react to your system?
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to create for myself?
Right.
And then when what I've created bumps up against your system, then we will work around how we're going to navigate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? But we're starting from the presumption that I'm establishing a standard of excellence. I presume that my standard of excellence will always dominate.
Mm-hmm.
I always start from that posture. And I encourage, when I talk to younger Black parents, I really encourage them, and I don't mean that in sort of paternalistic, like, oh, positive thinking. I mean on a functional level, right? As a man thinketh, so he is, right? That the power of death and life is in the tongue, right? We speak those things that are not as though they were. we first imagine what we want to have happen, and then we speak that into existence.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I don't care what it, there are all these little voices. What's that got to do with me? Nothing. 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 You decide what is in the best interest of your family. Again, when I quit my job, people were like, you're not white. We good to tell people that. You're not white. Black people do not quit good corporate jobs.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I did not quit good. That was 1986. I quit my job. I quit. I said, I don't like it.
Wow.
I'm out.
I'm out. I don't like it. And I'm not going to stay here and talk about y'all behind your back like egg-sucking dogs. I'm going to tell you to your face, I don't like this. I don't like you. I am going to do this on my own. And people were like, we do demographic research and statistical analysis. We have a management consulting firm, and people were like, you're Black. People kept reminding me, I was like, I got a mirror. People kept reminding me, you can't, you're a short, fat, dark, Black woman. What corporation is going to hire you to tell them anything?
Wow.
Wow.
That was 1986.
Wow.
We have never closed our doors. We have never filed bankruptcy.
Wow.
Business is how we have lived. And we lived together and ran this business and homeschooled and when we decided to homeschool our kids, people were like, you're not white.
Yeah.
White people get to homeschool their kids, okay? And when I said to Black people, you know what? The level of racism is more than I'm willing to tolerate. The number of Black people who said to me and my husband, what makes you think you're so special? Everybody's kids have to deal with this. Like, actually, as my husband said, not everybody's children, because my children will not. My children will not.
And you know what? That's kind of what I got from that article, was that everybody has to deal with this. This is what, children need to go through this. This is healthy. Right. This is what they need to experience. This is life. And why should they not be included in what life is all about?
Right.
So that's what I took from that also.
Well, I think that is, I do think that was the point. The other thing that was very disingenuous about the article is the whole idea of the problem with homeschooling is that it separates children from the general populace, right? Like the body politic needs all of us to be together, when good and ding dong well, all of us have never been together in school, okay?
No.
Never. That's why I had to cite those articles, those opinions of Supreme Court cases.
Right.
There's always been a stratification of educational options.
Can we pause for 1 minute?
Yes.
Just pause. My computer's dying and I don't want us to mess up this clip. So.
Okay. So we were talking about the Supreme Court decisions that you cited in your response.
Well, I think that what's so salient about both of those opinions is that when C. Madison and I decided to homeschool our children, the pushback that we got was, among other things, given his family background, because his uncle, James Nabrit, argued Brown v. Board of Education with Thurgood Marshall.
Well,
so there was this sense that you both come from well-established middle-class families, and you both have had access and opportunities to private schools and private colleges and college in general for generations. So my husband's paternal grandfather was at Morehouse. He was at Morehouse in the class of 1898. My maternal great-grandmother was at Bluefield State Teachers College in 1898. Both of us come from families that have been pursuing post-secondary education for as long as it's been legal for Black people to do so. both of us are from families that have been in lifelong marriages for as long as it's been legal for Black people to do so. So I think what's different about how we view things, I think a lot of times people feel that because we've had these experiences that we are somehow obligated to maintain certain kinds of postures, right? Whereas we see this as because we've had these kinds of opportunities, we have the freedom and the responsibility for continuous process improvement, right? Like there's a reason why, I absolutely understand why my husband's grandfather or his father and uncles were all in fraternities. I get why fraternities and sororities were a big thing. I'm not interested in joining any sorority. We weren't interested, and my husband was really clear with our kids. We're not funding any fraternity involvement, right? The collective is us as Black people, period, full stop. We're not doing any class-based affiliations.
Right.
We're just, and that's not to say that people who are engaged in that are the spawn of Satan, doesn't make them egg-sucking dogs. It's just that that's not where we're not about that. Right. Right. We're not about Jack and Jill. We're not about that.
Jack and Jill.
Yeah. We're not about that. And so I think being really clear about, like, strategically, what is the end game? What is it that we're working towards? Mm-hmm. And we were serious about the idea of not only our own independence, but also the support of the independence and self-determination of other Black people. Mm-hmm. And that requires some collective ideology and collective engagement, and when necessary, collective critique, right? We have to be able to challenge one another in love, right?
Right.
And to be able to say, the fact that I disagree with you doesn't mean I don't love you.
Right.
Right. And so, I think with the homeschooling, sometimes we get really caught up in, I know people were challenging us about, we've all worked so hard to get here, right? We've worked so hard to get access to these private schools. And so we can't let that go. And everybody has to have this to be strengthened. Mm-hmm. And, I kept bringing people back to that scripture about everything that's legal isn't helpful, right? There's some things I have access to. I'm not going to do that because it's not good for me.
Right.
Right. It's not good for me. But I do think it's hard for a lot of us to walk away from things that we perceive as hard-earned privilege. Mm-hmm. And I get that. I get that it was hard-earned privilege. But the fact that I have access still means I have, just like right now, college admissions, mm-hmm. right? There are all kinds of kids who are getting into a whole range of colleges. And you know what colleges now do? Because I volunteered to help with this from Wellesley. We call all the children who were accepted, because what we know is if you were accepted at Wellesley, you were probably accepted at a bunch of places, mm-hmm. right? The fact that you were accepted, that's great, but it's still your choice whether or not to participate, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, school is available, public, private, parochial, charter, and homeschooling. Right. I get to choose which option I want.
Right.
And you can't choose for me.
Right.
And I don't have anything to prove.
Right. Right. And
I don't have to prove. And people are like, what makes you think your kids are so special that they shouldn't have to go through what everybody else went through? Because they're mine.
Individuals. Yeah. Families are individuals.
Yeah, and they are special. But it's just like with gardening. There are some seeds you can plant directly in the garden, direct sow right now. You can do it in February, in March, when there's going to be multiple freezes.
Right.
Everything cannot be planted directly outside.
Right. That's great. Really?
And when you start from seed, before you transplant them, you have to harden them off slowly. Now, when we were raising our kids, people didn't say much to my husband because he was not the person.
He was not that person.
People would come to me like,
Right.
I didn't want to say anything to Brother Charles, but oh, girl, it just seemed like he got them kids under him all the time. The most consistent critique that I heard was, he's too involved with the children.
Wow.
And that goes back to, Samaya, to your point about what is the real driver. Right. So on the one hand, the article is talking about all kids should be educated, but we know that that's not really true because the U.S. Supreme Court has already ruled there's no fundamental right to education.
Right.
And because education is tied to tax base of property ownership, we know there's no pretense of equitable funding because there's no equitable way of generating that revenue if it's all linked to property.
Right.
So what is it that you really are talking about? And similarly, when people talk about, oh, the problem with Black families is they're dysfunctional and fathers aren't present. Isn't that the conventional wisdom that that's the problem with all of us?
Right.
And when you tell people, actually, I know who my daddy was. And my granddaddy, both of them. My great-grandfathers, all four of them. But yet the most consistent criticism that I heard was either Brother Charles, Mr. Nabrit, your husband, whatever the nomenclature, he's too involved.
Right.
Wow.
In the children's lives.
Right.
And that's how you know that the real problem is folks don't want our children to be nurtured and loved and protected and cared for. And when people see it, they are disquieted. They are disquieted. And the fact that homeschooling in the Black community is growing so rapidly is a huge challenge, and not just for people who are not homeschoolers. It's a challenge within the homeschooling community. Because and there's no point in acting like folks don't know that at the core of it, a whole lot of traditional homeschoolers began homeschooling because they did not want their children in school with Black people. And that's why so many homeschool co-ops are so anti-Black. And when we first started homeschooling, when I wrote the first and the second book on homeschooling, and initially I contacted folks like Focus on the Family and all these various homeschooling. And they told, oh no, we're not interested in the book.
Really?
Really, truly.
Wow.
Really, truly. Really, really, truly. Including some Christian homeschooling groups had the nerve to tell me your plan of salvation is too narrow.
Wow.
First of all, I don't have a plan of salvation. Just newsflash, right? I'm not a savior, so I don't have a plan of salvation. And secondly, the way that y'all just like live in Leviticus, I know you're not going to try to tell me about narrow, not inclusive. Yes. What it really came down to was they were not comfortable with Black people asserting independence.
Right.
So I'm no more enthralled with traditional homeschooling groups and what they are saying than I am with the state.
Right.
Because I know our evangelical brothers and sisters are more committed to being Caucasian than they are committed to being Christian.
Which is a shame because, Christian values, you're supposed to love everybody, right? But we know that that's not necessarily how it gets played out.
We know that within religious ideology, there are the principles and then there are the practices, right?
Right.
So just like we can look at the principles of Islam, which are beautiful,
They are, yeah.
And then we look at the practices and the way in which our Islamic brothers and sisters,
Yes.
Africans, and we know this does not coincide with the Quran.
Right.
What are you doing?
Right, exactly.
I mean, we see what you're doing, but what do you think you're doing?
What do you think you're doing, right?
And how do you think the rest of us can't say, and I'm looking at the Quran and I'm looking at what you're
People
doing?
pick and choose the parts that they want,
Mhm.
and the parts that we're going to disregard that part.
Exactly.
We're going to do that part, but we're going to disregard this,
And that's one of the best things about homeschooling is that there is the space to say to children, let's look at what is written, and then let's look at what is done.
Right.
Let's look at what is expressed and spoken. Let's look at what the behaviors are.
Right.
And creating this space for critical thinking is how we help our children step into who it is that they've been destined to become.
Mhm.
Right?
Right.
That's the challenge.
That's the challenge.
Is making that space of excellence. And for some people, that space for excellence might be in school.
Mhm.
It might be.
Mhm.
And for some people, it might be in a boarding school. Like I could never imagine sending my children to boarding school. But I know people who have gone to boarding school and they loved it. I know people who've sent their own children to boarding school and they feel convinced that that is the best space for their child.
Right.
What I don't understand is if I'm cool with you deciding on boarding school, independent day school, Catholic school, evangelical school, charter school, and I'm okay with that. Why are you so upset about me choosing homeschooling?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Good question.
Like, what's it to you?
Right. Right. Very good question. You know, I found it interesting, like some of her arguments about the state's rights versus the state's rights, the children's rights, and the parents' rights.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out why the state has rights when it comes to my children. Right? Maybe some responsibility, but where do the rights come from? Right? Like I know there's all this legal jargon too.
Well, I think it comes down to, and again, this is one of the missed opportunities I felt that the author wasted, was really she had a platform to talk about what the social contract is presumed to be between the citizen and the state.
Mm-hmm.
Right? She missed the opportunity to talk about that because depending upon how one views the understanding around a capitalist democracy, right? So what is the implied or stated social contract within a capitalist democracy? So that's the framework in which we look at who has rights and who has responsibilities, right? And where do those things come together? So her presumption, but what she did not state, but what seemed to be stated implied, if not expressed in her article, is the state interests and rights are tied to the future populace, right? So if we have generations of children who are not employable, who lack which, we're rapidly getting to that point.
But
right?
it's coming from the school system, though. The school system is producing these kids, not homeschoolers.
Right. Well, and that's why I'm talking about this missed opportunity.
Right.
Because essentially the standard, if we look at an international standard, so there are international tests that are done, right? On those international tests, the United States general population of school-age children is nowhere near the top. It's not even in the top 50%.
No, I know. Yeah.
Okay. So there is a fundamental problem with education across all boundaries in the US. So there's that.
Right.
The state has a vested interest in that, both in terms of its economic future, as well as the issue of national security. as the military process becomes increasingly computerized, who's going to run those systems? Who's going to run those systems?
Well,
So, yes, the state has an interest. Now, we might say, I don't agree with that, or I don't like that. But I think part of the problem is a lot of us have gotten really stuck on that whole Jeffersonian idea about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
mm-hmm.
The pursuit of happiness will never trump the rights of the state in a capitalist democracy. Because in a capitalist democracy, for one thing, democracy comes after capitalists, right? So the driver will always be money, right?
That might be a problem in and of itself, that money is the
driver. Money is the driver.
I'm okay with capitalism, but shouldn't there be some limits?
There are limits that we have to set for ourselves. I have to know the structure that I'm operating in, right? It's not just about having skills. It's like with sports. Like you could have mad game, but if your skill set is in basketball, but the game that's being played is football, you're going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no point in sitting around saying, I got mad skills. We're not playing.
That's true.
We're not playing that game.
Yeah.
This is the game that we are playing.
Okay.
This is the game that we are playing. And until I'm prepared to think about expatriating myself, this is the game and this is the court in which I'm playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I know that the state is going to exercise its rights, just like it exercises its rights if it decides to institute a draft, right? The fact that the state uses its power of the state to take my tax dollars and use it to fund military excursions around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, the fact that I hold fundamentalist Christian principles, which would include thou shalt not kill, that's a problem for me.
Yeah, that's true.
But I do not get to mark on my income tax. It's not like your church tithes, where you can write an envelope. You can't say this is just for Sunday school. You can't do that. You pay your taxes, and the state decides what that money will be used for.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
But,
so that's why the whole issue of the census is so important. That's why voting is so important. That's why I was so outraged with the number of Black public intellectuals who were telling people in 2012, my conscience won't allow me to vote the up ticket because, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are just the flip side of the same coin. Really? Yes, they are both supporters of systems of white supremacy, but that's part of the republic. But saying they're the same, that would be like saying Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis are flip sides of the same coin. Yes, they were both purveyors of systems of white supremacy. But one of them was vested in owning my children. So that's why they're not the same.
Right.
That's why they're not the same. So if I'm in this system, I'm existing here, I'm operating in this space, this is the game that's being played. I need to know how is the game scored?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying with that.
I feel like not enough of us are involved in politics. And I don't mean being the politician, because we have plenty of Black faces.
Thank you.
As politicians. But the people that's behind them driving policy, like, are we in that space enough? I don't think so.
We're not in that space enough. We're not holding people in those spaces accountable.
Right.
We're not finding, for one thing, too many of us opt out of the franchise.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole thing of I'm not voting because I don't have time to vote.
Mm-hmm.
I need people to stop lying and say, I'm not voting because I'm fundamentally an irresponsible person.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say you don't have time.
Right. I think the way you broke it down really made a lot of sense to me, because that's how people are. They either are very into it, or they say, you know what, I'm going to detach. I don't want anything to do with this system. And I don't care who's president. It doesn't matter to me. I don't want to conform to any part of that system. I don't want to be in it. But that's not the reality. We live in this world. We live in the United States. And so we are a part of it.
Because they ain't leaving. Okay.
Right.
You're not leaving. It's like when people say, you know, that's why I'm not supportive of the Black church, because it's been used against us in our oppression. And you're speaking to me in English, the language of the oppressor and the colonizer. I need stop.
So what you're basically saying is that we need to start playing the game that we're subject to anyway.
Yes.
Like in this system, part of this.
Or leave, like get your passport. Have you even gotten a passport to go visit some other places that you might think about leaving?
Mm-hmm.
You know how many of us got passports? And if you don't already have one, you're not going to be able to get one now.
Mm-hmm.
They are really tightening that up. Should everybody, by the time your kids are 10, you should have a passport for you and your kid, because you never know when you may have to sky up out of here.
Right.
Okay? Sky up out of here. And this thing of people acting and again, saying, oh, systems of white supremacy, but you're not acting like you really believe it.
Right.
I was married to somebody who was a lot like my crazy father. My father was very successful. He was one of the first Black managers at Western Electric. Really knew how to function.
Wow.
But my father was so clear about the adversary is walking to and fro, seeking whom he may devour. He's not running. He's walking, watching, looking for the opportunity. Don't ever put yourself in the position where you have to ask the white man for mercy. Don't be that person. Don't be the person who's late to work and thinking it's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be surprised.
Mm.
Okay.
Yes.
Don't be talking about how the white man this and the white man that. If you really believe that, you would govern yourself accordingly.
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
Because it's going to do, the system is going to do what it was made and created to do.
That's
at all times. Don't even think that it's not.
And if you're going to be here, figure out how to function.
Maneuver, right.
Or get a passport and start traveling and deciding where else you might like to live.
Right. Right.
That means bringing it back, Samaya, to your initial point about owning our own lives.
And being accountable. I mean, it's so important. It's not enough to say what you want to do if you're not going to take the steps that you need to take in order to progress and move further. It's not going to happen.
Right. Well, I mean, today I was at the garden this morning. I planted potatoes and onions. So we already had garlic planted from the fall. But when I was out there Wednesday, I was planting peas. And what I was thinking about is our garden is in the rear of our church. And so this church, not the building itself, but this congregation, this is a congregation that was founded by descendants of formerly enslaved Africans. Mm-hmm. This is a congregation that's over 110 years old. Wow. So my great-grandmother, when she finished at Bluefield State Teachers College, she and my great-grandfather moved to Columbus. They're one of the first members of this congregation. And she lived until I was 11, so I grew up knowing her. So my children are 5th generation in this congregation. Wow. Now, what's interesting to me is our church has a big food pantry, like most Black churches have food pantries, and that's wonderful. But what's weird to me is very few Black churches have gardens. Now, When I was there Wednesday, I was watching people waiting in line for their free box of food.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, this is an emergency situation and food pantries are needed now more than ever.
Right.
But we also recognize that one of the long-term complications from COVID-19 is that a lot of people who work harvesting food are not covered by health insurance. They're not making enough money to, social distance.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen if those people, if there are outbreaks in these various agricultural centers and people can't harvest the food?
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen if trucking lines are affected because truckers become sick and can't drive these trucks?
Right.
What happens when corporate supermarkets' profits are adversely affected and they decide we're just not going to be donating any more food?
Mm.
Again, this thing about being dependent on somebody, on a system that's already shown you, is my cranky grandfather used to say, these are the descendants of people who would sell your children on their way to church to cover a bad gambling debt.
Wow.
That's who these people are. They would sell your children on their way to church to cover a bad gambling debt. And you're going to rely on them to keep you fed?
Mm. For every bite of food you eat,
You're gonna rely on them to make sure that you got enough food to eat, as opposed to planting some peas, planting some green beans, planting some potatoes. And you don't have to have a farm to do that.
No.
Right? You don't have to have a farm to do that. But we behave like we don't believe fat meat is greasy. Okay.
Right.
Until it slides off the plate. And then we're like, I can't believe they did me like that. Really? Did you just get here? You don't know nothing about our history? Nothing? Right. A little bit. A little bit. I get how immigrants are shocked. I really do. I feel bad for them because they came here and drank all the Kool-Aid.
All of it.
All of it. Right? You know how they used to talk to us like, you Black Americans, I don't understand.
Right.
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 Now you know.
Yeah, you'll see. You'll see.
Right.
It won't even make it plain.
Right.
Wait for it. He's gonna break it down for you. He's
right.
gonna break it down for you. So yes, in terms of the politics, we've had people who've been involved in, retail politics and being elected to office. But sadly, in too many instances, having people in those positions hasn't really affected us beneficially.
Right.
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 And particularly at the local level.
Is it because we don't? Is it because we don't hold them accountable? Like we don't. Here's what I'm wondering.
Okay.
Is it because we don't hold them accountable and have clear things that we want them to do when they get into office?
Yes.
We kind of just vote. Like even though President Obama, we were happy to have a Black president, but did we have a list of things that we wanted him to do when we voted for him? And that doesn't just go for him, but for any president.
Well, I think two things. I think our greatest level of impact is at the lowest level of the organization, right? So politically, who we have on the school board, who we have on city council, who we have in the mayor's office. Those are the things that are going to most directly affect us, right, on our day-to-day lives. The thing with Barack Obama is really interesting to me because on the one hand, I do get the symbolism of a Black president. That was very powerful and very evocative. What was troubling to me was how so many of us acted like we thought that because we elected somebody Black as president, that was going to change the empire.
Right.
We elected him to be president. We did not elect him to be emperor.
Right.
Right? That was the first thing. The second thing is the policies that he did put forth that have the greatest impact for us, a lot of us act like, oh, well, so that was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But like, access to medical care is like a huge thing.
Right.
And you know what demographic sector was most benefited from that? Us. And again, this goes back to my issue with, so this thing about the Harvard Magazine article was just part of an ongoing conflict for me. I have a real issue with people who are public intellectuals and people who are being paid by elite institutions. And what I see is their ethical failure to be truthful about things. And I wrote a paper for an international ethics conference 2 years ago in Copenhagen. And the title of the article was Pharaoh's Magicians. It was a line that I took from a speech that Minister Louis Farrakhan gave, which I thought was just really profound, in which he talked about how Pharaoh's magicians undermined Pharaoh's ability to think strategically and politically. So Pharaoh couldn't really hear and process what Moses was saying, because at each stage where Moses, turned the water into blood and turned the rod into a snake, each time that Pharaoh would be like, well, I should pay attention to this. Right. Each time Pharaoh's magicians would say, hey, we can do the same thing. Don't worry about it. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. We can do the same thing. And as a consequence, Pharaoh and his armies, what he used to say, got drowned in the Red Sea. Pharaoh was distracted by his magicians, the very people who should have been giving him wise counsel. Frequently, just like with politicians who should be speaking for us as people, a lot of folks in the academy who should be the ones saying to us, let's process this, let's break this down, let's look at this, what is really happening here? They didn't do that. They're Pharaoh's magicians. Right. And so they were the very ones, interestingly enough, when you look at, now what happened remember when Cornel West was just so saddened by Barack Obama's failure to act? Like, he's just not doing enough for us. And I'm sorry, we got to speak truth to power.
Right.
Have you heard anything from him since this administration?
Not that I heard, no.
Peep, little peep, not a big, just. Now, what Barack Obama had there were a lot of things I had issues with, particularly his foreign policies. These increased military excursions.
Yeah.
I was not happy with his immigration policies. But the Affordable Care Act is something that was very, very tangible and very, very beneficial to Black people. And part of the reason why you know that it was important and beneficial is anytime you see the white man get mad about something, that's how you know. That's how if it wasn't important, they wouldn't say anything. Just like when people say, voting doesn't matter. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying to keep you from voting.
This is true. Right.
Okay? If the Black church didn't matter, you know what? They wouldn't keep bombing them. Okay?
Right.
I just want us to get serious about the real pandemic. Just shedding stupidity.
Yeah.
Just shedding off of them. Stop being stupid. And if you can't stop being stupid, stay home.
Right.
Stay home with your mouth shut.
Right. Well, even looking at something like homeschooling, right? Looking at it from a Black perspective. So there's this narrative out there that Black parents aren't involved enough, almost like the example you gave with your husband, right? We're not involved enough. We're not involved enough in our children's education, and we're not willing to make the sacrifices for our children to have a good education.
Right.
Enter now, more of us are homeschooling, right? Like, we're flooding the homeschooling scene probably at rates that's never been seen,
Right.
which means that we're taking responsibility for our own children's education, right? At an even higher level. And now they want to, that's why your last line blew me away in your response.
The last one?
I think it was the last line where you said, I wonder if the reason you want to regulate or ban homeschooling now is because Black people
Yes.
are doing it.
Right. I definitely think that is a big part of it. I think the other thing, again, and this is why critical thinking is so important and why I hold our public intellectuals to such a high standard, because that's what they get paid to do, is to read and think and write.
Mm-hmm.
And so this whole mythology about Black people aren't serious about their children's education, that is a lie from the pit. We have always been vested in our children's education. Yep. We were serious about our children being educated when educating our children came at the potential cost of death.
Yes.
We were secretly teaching our children to read, knowing that we could be killed for that. So people need to miss me with this foolishness about Black people not serious about education. We've always been serious about education.
That's right.
We've been serious about education. We've been serious about marriage. We've been serious about our families. We've been serious about business. And whenever we do something well, they come and try to burn it down. So that's the first thing. Stop lying. Okay?
Right.
Stop lying. This is where liars go.
Right.
All liars, fornicators, adulterers, workers of iniquity, all y'all in the pit.
Right.
So that's the first thing. Okay, stop lying. Secondly, if you just run the numbers, and I think I sent you an article that I did, homeschooling, about the so-called achievement gap. Mm-hmm. And it goes through, and it's kind of boring, but it goes through in really specific detail from preschool all the way to high school. And it looks at comparative data across racial groups. Mm-hmm. Black parents, now here's where we often drop the ball. Black parents have traditionally had much more confidence in schools. Mm-hmm. We were really convinced that if the child, that's why you have a higher percentage of Black parents putting children in early learning environments. Mm-hmm. It's not just because they're working. There's really the belief that having the child in preschool at age 3 or at age 4 is going to be academically beneficial, mm-hmm. when frequently it is not. Right. Okay, that's one thing. The other problem that we have as Black parents is we assume that because the child is at school, that all of their academic and intellectual enrichment has happened. So when they come home, they don't have to do anything. Right. They might have to do homework, but that's it. Right. The third thing that this is a huge issue, television and cable television and video games. Mm-hmm. And again, this is another example of what I mean about the gap between what we profess. Like, I know about systems of white supremacy, and yet I got cable TV pumped into my house and my children are watching it 8, 9, 10 hours a day. Mm-hmm. What messages do you think are being transmitted through any kind of nationally available media? Right. Even if it has a Black face on it. Especially if it has a Black face on it. Why? Now, again, this is one of the things that people thought was really crazy when we homeschooled. You know, because you read the book. C. Madison was not kidding. He didn't play the radio. He was not to be played with. There was no cable television in our house. There were no video games. School went 12 months. There was no 3-month summer break. Community service was mandatory. Okay? You're not going to just be a consumer in society. You're going to be a contributor. And you're going to be a contributor in your own community of Black people. Right. Right. Now, We allow our children to spend way too much time being entertained. Okay?
I agree.
Way too much time being entertained. Now, he also had a thing about 2 hours of quiet reading every day. And people are like, 2 hours? Oh, Jesus. They gotta be kids. Do they? And is reading 2 hours a day, does that mean you're not being a child? And what kills me is the same people who will tell you 2 hours of quiet reading is too much, but will sit for 2 hours at the barbershop,
Oh, yeah.
2 hours at the beauty shop.
Well, how many hours at the TV?
At the
How many hours in front of the TV?
Or when, enrichment programs. So our kids went to space camp, oceanography camp, engineering camp. People are like, girls, that's a lot of money. Shoot, I can't. And I'm looking at your hair and nails.
Right.
I'm looking at
Right.
that cell phone that you got satellite access to Mars.
Right.
I'm looking at them 2 cars that you're paying between $400 and $600 a month on.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell me you can't afford to send your child to oceanography camp. Just say, I would rather spend the money having my nails done.
Right.
That's okay. Because we already see that.
We can see it, right?
We see what's important to you. So yeah, we have the issue of the white man. That's a constant. That's not a variable. That's a constant. The only variable is, how am I going to respond to this? I know the white man does not mean my children any good. I know that.
Right.
What am I going to do? So yeah, Barack Obama, as he said from the beginning, I want to be everybody's president. Right?
Everybody means white, really.
He meant
all lives matter. That means that.
I want to be everybody's president. And his mother was white.
Mm-hmm.
And he was raised by his white grandparents. I'm not mad at him. Okay? I think he did the best he could. And I think overall, he did an outstanding job running the empire.
Right.
Right? He had the skill set to manage. And, sometimes you don't even know that somebody has done a good job until somebody else comes along and messes it up. Okay, for example, I'll use myself as a negative example. I did not really appreciate what it took to maintain a well-organized house until I had to do it myself.
Yeah.
Like, one of the reasons a lot of people are really flipping out right now about COVID-19 is that they have to be at home all day with each other, their spouse and their spawn. Mm-hmm. And they got to cook and clean and manage their children's education. And a lot of people thought it wasn't that hard until they had to do it themselves.
Right.
And I think Barack Obama made running the empire look easy. Mm-hmm. Because he was just on it, wasn't he? We got this. I agreed with everything, but I got this organized. I got that organized. There was no meltdowns. There wasn't like one day I'm saying this, and the next day I'm saying that. There was nothing to let me explain what I really meant.
Right.
You had it down pat, the look, everything. Everything was perfect.
Between George Bush and Donald Trump, we had Barack Obama.
Right.
It's a job I wouldn't want, but I have to admit the job was done well. The job was done well. And I think what each of us has to figure out is, what is the job that is before me?
Right.
What is my job?
Right.
When I agreed to marry C. Madison, my job, among other things, I went to law school. I started a business. I've written 5 books. But my principal issue, as my mother used to say, the problem isn't that young people want too much. It's that you want the wrong thing and you don't have your priorities straight. Mm. Right? Mm-hmm. My first priority after God was my husband, not my children. My children were derivative. I love my children to death. They are so cute. Even now, they're old and crusty, but they are so cute. I look at them now sometimes and I just think, I can't believe I had them. Seriously, they are so nice and so smart and so sweet. My grandmother used to say, Paula's boys are so sweet. You know, they get that from Charles. My own grandmother. My own grandmother knew those kids are too nice to be Paula's kids. They are. They are. I'm not kidding. They are amazing. They are so kind. And they were adorable when they were babies. But their daddy came first. Okay. He's first. So sometimes they would be like, why are you buying peas? We don't like peas. I buy what your daddy likes to eat. You're just passing through. One day you'll be gone.
That's true.
Right. Well, you know what? I feel like that kind of thinking, we don't even have those conversations now. We live in an era of women's, what is it? Women's rights and women's, you know, we don't, do we modern day women think that way anymore? And should we be really thinking about that?
I think we don't think. That's part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the potential benefits of COVID-19 is it has forced some people to slow their roll.
Yeah.
You know, thinking takes time. You need to be still so that you can hear that still small voice. Like the Spirit wants to speak to us. But if we're ripping and running, we can't hear it.
Right.
I think that certainly a lot of feminists and maybe even some womanists are, in my opinion, conflicted between what is really in my best interest. I mean, one of the reasons why, and I don't know if I mentioned to you about this book that I'd written, The Power of a Virtuous Woman.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to get and read.
Part of the reason why I wrote that book is I really wanted to address the very issue that you're raising. Because I do know a lot of women who will say, like, you know, girl, you need to I'm not about that. You know, he got two hands, right? Have we not heard that?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Why I got to fix his plate?
right.
He ain't crippled. Here's the thing. This is not about women who do those kinds of things are only doing it because they don't have the ability to do anything else. And I think there certainly has been the subtext of presumption around that.
Mm.
And so part of the thing that I really wanted to be really clear about was, yes, I went to an independent day school and I was the only Black kid in my class and I did really well and I was president of student government. And yes, I went to Wellesley College and I had a double major. And I worked for Shirley Chisholm. I was a Wellesley Washington intern. And I was president of college government. And yes, I went to law school and I did really well. And I won Best Oralist on the International Moot Court team and was awarded Order of the Barrister, all that good stuff. I've written 5 books. I started a business. But my principal issue was always, while he was alive, it was my husband. And the thing is, people want stuff. Like everybody wants a high functioning family, right? I've never met anybody who's like, you know, really, I'd like a dysfunctional family. I'd like a lot of conflict, maybe a couple of divorces. That's what I'm shooting for. I know it's ambitious. Nobody says that. But people are often not willing to do the hard work in our personal lives the way we will professionally. Like when I was in law school, nobody said, shoot, that's entirely too much work. I wouldn't do that just to get a law degree. And you paying them to? Nobody ever said that. People said, oh girl, that's amazing. That's, that you get it, girl. Go ahead. But when I brought that same kind of focused energy to my marriage, people were like, what? I wouldn't do that. When I was working for AT&T and busting my butt, working crazy hours, people like, get it, girl. Okay.
Right, you're right.
When I was doing the same thing for my children,
Mm-hmm.
people were like, oh, for God's sakes, Paula, you really gonna polish their shoes every day when they took naps? I used to wash their shoestrings and polish their shoes.
Wow.
I knew my children were special. I wanted it to be evident to everyone who saw them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
When you look at them, I want you to know there's obviously somebody thinks they special. Okay. Somebody, the fact that now one of my children, Damon, was the dirtiest baby. I don't even know how this child got as dirty as he did. I used to have to bathe this child several times a day. Okay. Several times a day. But you know what? That's fine. Play as much as you want. I don't mind bathing you. I don't mind bringing my A game to my family, just like I brought my A game to my work. I don't mind, when you're writing a book, you're going to write it, edit it, write it over. That's what it takes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to do that intellectually, but I'm not willing to bring that same energy to my family.
That's a good, you know what? I want, Aisha, what we should do is read her book, The Virtuous Woman, and have you come back to talk just about that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that conversation isn't being had enough in our community.
You're right.
And then we wonder why.
I think it's two parts. I think we as women don't do it. And I think the other part is men really don't. My husband was an extraordinary husband. I mean, I'm talking about before people were using words like ally, a woman is ally.
Mm-hmm.
My husband was a womanist ally. When I was in law school, everybody has to do moot court. Madison used to come to moot court competitions like they were sporting events. And people were like, why is your husband here? In the back room. It's brilliant. People were like, get your husband. Okay. And when somebody puts you first, it's easy. It's so easy to love somebody who loves you, right? See, it's so easy for someone who respects you. Charles thought I was brilliant. He was my biggest supporter. So yeah, it was no big deal if we were sitting watching TV at 9:00 and say, "Oh, that cake," you see commercials. He'd say, "Oh, that cake looks good," or "Oh, I sure wish I had some sweet potato pie." You think I'm not going to get up and make that man a sweet potato pie right now, 9:00 at night? Homemade crust? Absolutely. Happy to do it. But see, a lot of men want that,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The leader eats last.
Mm-hmm.
Charles never had to say to me or the kids, I'm the man of this house. It was crystal clear. Okay. And it was clear because he put me first and then our children ahead of all of his own interests.
Right.
We came first. So it was not, people were like, how did you get your kids to agree to 2 hours of quiet reading? How'd you get, and again, you read the book, the kids hated being homeschooled. Okay. They hated it. And they told us every day. But one of the leadership lessons from that experience is when you treat people with respect, mm-hmm. they do things they don't want to do.
Right.
Charles was so respectful to our children.
Mm-hmm.
Even when they were angry, they did what he asked them to do. And the evidence of that is Damon and Charles were admitted to Princeton and Evan went to Amherst. We could not have done that work for them. They did that work.
Right.
They did that.